Defining scope of work. The first lesson plan will cover the topics of defining, developing, and managing the scope of work for a project. As a member of a nonprofit board of directors, this is a component of project management that is essential for you to not only be involved in its development, but also to understand how it is used by the project manager and project team. Learning objectives. Along with defining what a scope of work is and why it is important for a project, the board of directors should develop an understanding of a scope of work that encompasses these three learning objectives. You will learn about the importance of involving stakeholders in development of a scope of work and the management of their expectations. You will also learn about the importance of managing and documenting changes from the start of the project. Finally, you will learn how to use information from the scope of work document to develop a work breakdown structure of the project deliverables. What is a scope of work? The scope of work for a project is defined as a written document that defines the work that will be completed by the end of the project, specifying the deliverables of the project. What is the purpose of this document? Why is it important? The scope of work is essential for outlining both the purpose of the project and the needs of the stakeholders, as well as working to manage their expectations. It is also important for the project team itself to understand the work breakdown structure of the deliverables that are outlined. A video. This video shown here is a quick overview of the scope of work for a project, how you as stakeholders may need to be involved, and how it is used and made by the project manager and their team.
In this video, I want to answer the question, what is project scope? Project scope is, in some ways, the easiest thing to define in project management. But it is also, in many ways, the hardest thing to agree. Negotiating the scope of your project, for me, is right at the heart of good project management, but it's also the toughest challenge we'll face as project managers. The easiest way to define project scope is with this simple picture. Everything inside this circle represents the scope of your project. The scope of your project is everything that you have to do as a project manager, or put another way, everything that you need to deliver. Everything outside of the circle is out of scope. You don't have to do it. These are things that are either not economically viable, not needed by the organization, or perhaps will be delivered by other projects at other times. So if everything inside the circle is in scope and everything outside the circle is out of scope, sometimes called project exclusions or exclusions from scope, what's the issue? The issue, of course, is stakeholders trying to feed additional functionality into your scope, therefore extending the scope boundaries without necessarily increasing your resources or your budget or your schedule to allow for you to deliver them. This is known as scope creep. So why is negotiating scope so difficult? Well, the answer is simple. Because you've got many stakeholders, and each of them has different preferences, different needs, different wants, different desires. They have different agendas and different interests. And the process of negotiating scope is negotiating against all of those competing pressures, trying to satisfy this person and that person at the same time, and all of this with a limitation on the resources you have available. So it's a multi-way negotiation with different stakeholders trying to negotiate and balance among their different needs and desires. And of course, with other stakeholders negotiating for additional resources or additional time in order to deliver the greater amount of scope. Consequently, you won't please everybody. Your job as a project manager is to find the best balance that you can to satisfy and smooth over the concerns of as many stakeholders as you can, and to get it signed off by those stakeholders who have the ultimate authority to decide what the final scope will be, what the final budget will be, and how long you have to deliver it. So scope is an easy concept, but negotiating it and documenting it and making it stick and winning over your stakeholders at the same time is a tremendously difficult challenge. For me, the very hardest we face as project managers.
What is included in a scope of work document? One of the first tasks done in the scope of work is developing the purpose of the project, specifically through outlining SMART goals and objectives. SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. This can be used as a guideline when creating objectives for the project. Another important component is outlining specific project deliverables. Project deliverables are what the stakeholders expect at the end of a project. These can include both the unique product or service that the project should render and the documents and reports completed throughout the project. Additionally, the scope of work is where the general project constraints, assumptions, critical success factors, and resource requirements, such as materials, labor, cost, and time, are clarified. The scope of work provides an outline of the process and procedures that should be used for managing potential changes made later to the scope of work for the project. This includes topics such as the authorization of changes, change orders, and managing the effects of changes on the budget and timeline of the project. Finally, establishing a work breakdown structure, or WBS, to clearly outline and provide detail for all project deliverables is essential to include in the scope of work document. The work breakdown structure is a detailed outline that encompasses all of the project deliverables. Stakeholder involvement. Stakeholder involvement is vital in the development of the project scope. Later in this course, you will learn more about the importance of stakeholder involvement, but from the more in-depth viewpoint in the decision-making module. Stakeholders can provide essential information for the development of a project scope, including knowledge about the requirements, deadlines, goals, and expectations for the project. One of the major roles a board member will have as stakeholders is helping to define the critical success factors for a project. These are the major expectations that the project team must accomplish for the project to be considered successful. Finally, it is important for stakeholders to refer back to this document later in the project to compare the current progress to those original objectives established in the scope of work. This is an efficient way to manage expectations throughout the course of the project. Managing and documenting change. The scope of work for a project is a great place to first start thinking about how the project team and stakeholders should manage and document changes that may occur throughout the project. This is also a topic that will be discussed in more detail in the decision-making module. Managing and documenting change is vital to the success of a project because it works to prevent scope creep. Scope creep is a trend on projects where there is incremental expansion of the project scope which goes undocumented. This can lead to delays, additional costs, and more setbacks for the project. This part of the scope of work also clarifies changes for stakeholders, as well as their impact on other tasks for project team members, and clarifies necessary adjustments to the budget, schedule, and project plan in order to sustain the initial objectives and critical success factors. Processes to manage change. Here are some processes that can be outlined in the scope of work document as ways to manage changes for a project. Designating an authority to authorize and implement change orders. This would probably be you as a board member of the client organization. Establishing a process of submitting and reviewing change requests as they come in from the project team or external contractors. Implementing a change system, such as a task or change tracking system to help track and document changes to the project scope. An example of this would be the history feature provided in a Google Doc. Work breakdown structure. The final component of the project scope that we will review in this module is the work breakdown structure. The WBS provides a detailed outline or chart of all the project deliverables that have been presented in the scope of work document. This is a tool used to make the overall work of a project more manageable, as well as integrate information about the scope, cost, resources, and schedule. An example of a WBS. Here is an example of a deliverable based on a WBS. This is a small WBS compared to those that may be developed for some projects, but an important component of a WBS is the amount of detail included. The more detailed the WBS, the more tasks identified to accomplish the work, and the easier it will be for the project manager to assign tasks to the project team. As a board member, and therefore a major stakeholder in the project, the amount of detailed information you include in the expectations for deliverables concerning cost, timeline, and quality, the more detailed the WBS can be to assist the project manager and their team. So, why is this important? To review, the scope of work establishes a common purpose for the project to be understood by both the project team and the stakeholders. It also works to integrate the knowledge the stakeholders possess about the project constraints, requirements, and critical success factors with the technical knowledge of the project manager. The scope of work establishes ways to control scope creep and manage probable changes throughout the course of the project, as well as outlines a work breakdown structure, or WBS, of the project deliverables to be utilized by the project manager. What's next? After reviewing this module, you should be able to answer the following quiz questions. This knowledge about project scope, specifically concerning project deliverables outlined in the WBS, will bring you into your next module where you will learn about logic models. Before moving on in the course, minimize this video and please click on the button at the right corner of the web page labeled Quiz to proceed and to test your knowledge on scope of work. Thanks for listening.